Welcome to you who are looking at the school for the first time, and we pray that God will lead you in the way you should go. Now, if we had a chance to lead you, there would be no other choice. But if He leads, there may be, and we urge you to be sensitive to His leading. Let me ask you who are married to also pay attention to your spouse. It's amazing how much the voice of the Holy Spirit sounds like your spouse, and you need to listen. I always ask students who have just come, and if they're married, I always look at their husband or wife and say, "How do you feel about this?" It gets some interesting answers. I remember when we were struggling with it, and I was speaking with the registrar on the phone, and I told him I would really be praying about God's direction. Cynthia said in the background, "You pray while I pack." So that took away all the pressure that was there. So having your spouse alongside you, if you are married, makes all the difference in the world. Now today I want to talk about facing your giants. Giants. It's easy to talk about giants as long as they're lumbering over someone else's landscape. But when you find them at your doorstep, or discover that one has invaded your home, or even more dangerously come inside your head, you realize how intimidating a giant can be. They have several names, these giants of ours. If I had the time, I would rattle off 12 or 15, just a few to start our thinking. There's a giant called fear. Fear. Even though most of us don't want to admit it, most of us entertain fears. If you're among those who are looking at the school, one of your fears would probably be financial circumstances. The fear of inadequacy, the fear of academic demands. I spoke with a first-year student just before coming up to my little office here shortly ago, and I said to her, "How's it going?" She said, "It's more difficult than I thought it would be." And you who have not yet begun your courses here perhaps entertain fears of the academic demands, and they are certainly there, though there is no reason to fear, as we will learn. And there's always the fear of the unknown, not knowing what looms out there on the horizon. And you think about it, your imagination kicks into gear, and before long you're off and running and feeling again intimidated. There's another fear, unresolved conflicts. Maybe there are some going on in your marriage. Maybe in a friendship that was once strong and close. But now, because of the conflict, you're at a distance from each other. You feel fractured. Sometimes these conflicts lead to bitterness. Someone wrote that bitterness is like drinking poison, thinking it will kill the other person. Some people are eaten up with bitterness. You may be in that category. It is easy as we get older to have a list of enemies that we stack up, if not written down, at least in the back of our heads. Then there is the giant of jealousy and envy. I used to battle with that, quite honestly. Most folks don't know that. Cynthia could tell you, when we were dating, I was filled with jealousy. I worried about the most stupid things, and as I look back, it still feels embarrassing. But I don't know of any sin that attacks the ministry like envy or jealousy. When you realize that God's blessing rests on certain individuals and doesn't feel like it rests on you in the same capacity. Or they may have a church that's larger than your church, or their ministry may have extended beyond what yours ever will. how easy it is to feel jealous. And the giant of envy moves in and steals what could otherwise be joy and a sense of confidence and gratitude that God is using any one of us for his purposes. And of course, my list has to include lust. The fire of lust that burns in the chest of all of us. It often smolders in secrecy. It hides behind pornography on the internet or the hidden secrets of our hearts. Some of you today are addicted to this giant, and it's the best kept secret. No doubt those in your own home don't even know that giant has you cornered and has brought you under his thumb. It's frightening when you think about what that might do in the future as it gets a grip on your life, and one day it will be found out. Or maybe the lust is simply the kind of lust that attaches itself to greed, another giant. And finally, I would list discouragement, which leads to depression. I come across that often when I speak to fellow ministers or talk to students and talk to people in our church. The struggle with just discouragement, that gnawing giant that eats away at you in unguarded moments. And you can't always, in fact, you rarely can explain how it got started. But there it is again. And it hits you at the most unusual time. When you would least expect it, you fall into the valley of discouragement. Or as the old book says, the slough of despond. Whatever may be your giant, let me tell you that I've learned over the years that giants work most effectively in valleys. When we have hit a valley, that's when the giant begins to march toward us and intimidates us the most. There's a giant that appears in the pages of the Scriptures in the 17th chapter of 1 Samuel, a story you have heard since you were a child in Sunday school. I return to this story, in all honesty, once or twice a year. And I just sit down and I read the 17th chapter of 1 Samuel. Every time I read it, I see more and more. We read in verse 2 of 1 Samuel 17 that Saul and his men, the men of Israel, had gathered and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up in battle array to encounter the Philistines. If you're ever in Israel, you must visit this valley. The thing I noticed when I was first there, way back in my first visit to Israel, is how vast it is. I thought it would be a small valley with a little creek, but it's enormous, huge, sloping on one side, and then at the base where apparently at one time a stream ran through, and then on the other side the slope there. That's where they are. And what makes the valley intimidating is not the landscape. It is the presence of a champion. He's called that more than once in this chapter. In fact, the emphasis always falls on the externals when you deal with giants. In this case, we read that the Philistines stood on the mountain on one side and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, and the valley between them. Then a champion came out from the armies of the Philistines named Goliath. I know you know the story. I know you're familiar with where it's going, but I want to ask you for a few moments to put yourself in that valley and to imagine looking across the way and seeing this huge, imposing individual in full armor. We read that he was about 9 feet 7 inches tall. I've never known anyone that tall. I know a number of people over 7 feet tall, but I've never seen anyone even 8 feet, to say nothing of almost 10 feet in height. As if that isn't enough, we read that he wore a bronze helmet on his head and was clothed with what's called scale armor that weighs about 150 pounds, just the coat of mail that went from his shoulders to his knees. And then he has these bronze leggings and then a bronze javelin slung between his shoulders. And in addition to that, the shaft of a spear, may have been like a club. And the head of it was about 25 pounds. And he had a shield carrier who walked before him. That's the most nervous job of the whole group. The guy that's the shield bearer for Goliath. It was, by the way, a full-length shield. So he not only is armored, he has a shield to protect himself from whatever you may throw at him, or so he thought. And he stood and he shouted. He continues this, we read in the chapter, verse 16, for 40 days and nights. He is screaming these words of threat. I've often looked on Goliath as the cross-eyed discus thrower. He didn't set any records, but he sure kept the crowd awake. That's Goliath. I mean, he's marching up and down on the other side of the slope saying, send me whoever you wish. And whoever wins will gain the mastery over this country, this nation. You win, you own us. We win, you're our slaves. Giants are like that. They're full of intimidating words, and when they get inside your head, you hear the screams over and over again. Even though you pray, even though you are aware and are warned of this in a message like this one, there they are. And you hear their voices. And he, verse 8, stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel. And so, why do you come out to draw up in battle array? Am I not the Philistine and you servants of Saul? By the way, the tallest one on the Israeli side is Saul, but he's not out there fighting him. Saul's a celebrity. He's not a hero. There's a real difference. We're going to meet a hero in a moment, but he says, choose a man for yourselves and let him come down. If he's able to fight with me and kill me, we will become your servants, and vice versa. And again, verse 10, the Philistine said, I defy the ranks of Israel. And I'm sure there were a few curse words thrown in as well. And he took great delight in it, as you could just hear the armor he was wearing clanging. For one day after the next. And we read, they were intimidated to the point, into verse 11, that they gave way to dismay and fear. See it? Greatly afraid. There he is, for everyone to see, mean as a junkyard dog. He's a warrior from his earliest years, and he's nobody to mess with. And Israel knew it, and all retreated to their tents. Now suddenly the text moves us about 10, 15 miles due east to a little hamlet named Bethlehem. And there at Bethlehem there is a family. Several of the boys are already deployed in the army, and they're fighting with Saul. Or they're afraid alongside Saul, but there's one that remains. And the father, whose name is Jesse, says to this young man, David, I want you to take this to those who are in battle. And he gives him some supplies, some food. Verse 14 tells us that David was the youngest, and the 3 oldest followed Saul. They are named up here in verse 13. Eliab, the firstborn, Abinadab, the second, and Shammah, apparently old enough to fight in the army. So he's got 3 boys in battle, And now he's saying to David, this teenager, run this errand and take this over to them. Understand, David has never seen the battle. He's been keeping his father's sheep, and he could have been 100 miles away and not known less about it. And so he hears his father. He understands the responsibility, and so he runs the errand, and he comes on the scene, and he sees this situation for the first time. This is a marvelous part of the story. He's talking there with the soldiers. He's near his own brothers, and he hears the voice of Goliath as he screams across the distance. And David, who is unintimidated, fresh out of the field, having protected the sheep, as we will read, from wild animals, which, by the way, that is never recorded when that happened. So all of this is happening in his private world, but that's his background. He's a man of the field. He is a lover of God, and his heart is pure. And so verse 24 tells us when the men of Israel saw the man, that is Goliath, they fled from here and were afraid. And they said to him, have you seen this man who is coming up? Surely he's coming to defy Israel. Everything is external. There's not a word about the power of God. There's not a word about the protection of the land of the people of Israel. It is all about the giant. That happens, by the way, when a giant assaults us. And so verse 26, there's a nice refreshing change. David spoke to the men who were standing by him, said, "Oh, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should taunt the armies of the living God?" How beautiful is that? Just a brief, spontaneous response. Who does he think he is? Does he know who our God is? Of course he doesn't. And the people said, "Well, this what will happen. Thus it will be done for the one who kills him." And they described to him the reward, which, by the way, wasn't all that great. It was Saul's daughter. That's another story. But anyway, Eliab. I like the brothers. We all got older brothers, don't we? Eliab, his oldest brother, heard him speak, and Eliab's anger burned against David, of all things. Eliab's not out there fighting that dude. He's back with his knees knocking in the tent, but his young runt of a brother shows up and says, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine?" And Eliab has a choice word for David. He said, "Why have you come down?" Listen to this. "And with whom have you left those few sheep out in the field?" Makes you want to cut his lips off when you hear a guy say something like that. I'm surprised David didn't slug him. But of course, he's not the enemy. That is not the main enemy. There'll always be people who will bring you down. There will always be folks who want to make you look foolish. Especially when you decide you're going to walk by faith and not sight. Especially when you determine you're going to have a ministry that's different. It's not based on what everyone else is doing and saying and communicating. It's based on what you know the Word of God teaches, and that's what you're going to be doing. You're committed to it. And in come the giants, and in come the friends of the giants. "And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness?" I know your insolence and the wickedness of your heart. You have come down in order to see the battle. There's a suggestion that it might even say, "Be seen at the place of battle." You've come so folks will think you're a big shot. David said, wasn't I just asking a question? I like the way the old King James renders this. "Is there not a cause? You men don't realize that there's a cause to fight for? Yeah. The giant wore scales, but believe me, the more obvious scales were those on the eyes of everyone in Saul's camp who focused on the giant. The giant. It's all about the giant. David's focus is on the Lord his God, as we're going to see. Verse 32, David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail on account of him. Your servant will go and will fight with the Philistines. Now listen to Saul. Saul said to David, you're not able to do it. Isn't that encouraging? I mean, Saul's not doing it. You'd think he'd be willing to have anybody go and give it a try. But of course, this young teenager standing in front of him, he says, you're but a youth, and he's been a warrior from his youth. David said to Saul, your servant, now listen to this, only time you'll know about it. David says, oh no, you don't understand, King Saul. Back when I was keeping my dad's sheep, there was a lion and a bear that came and took a lamb from the flock, and I went out after him and attacked him. When's the last time you visited a zoo and got a real good look at a lion, or been up in Alaska and seen a bear? You want to have a lot of distance between you and that bear you're looking at. They're the top of the food chain. They're the baddest things around. And he said, well, a lion come and look at how he puts it. He said, I went after him and attacked him and rescued it. That's the lamb from his mouth. And when he rose up against me, I seized him by the beard and struck him and killed him. No one ever would have known it if it hadn't been for that verse of scripture. And he says, your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine is nothing compared to those four-legged animals I've fought with, and God has given me a victory over. David said, the Lord who delivered me, look at his eyes. His eyes are on the Lord. What a wonderful way to deal with giants. As the Lord delivered me from the paw of the lion, the paw of the bear, well, he'll deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said, go, and God bless you. Isn't that crazy? Okay. But that's not all Saul says. Look at the next scene. Saul clothed David with his armor. Saul is a 58 long, and David is about a 36 regular. And so he puts all of this on him. He looks like a walking garage sale from an Army Navy surplus store. He's got a helmet looking out the ear hole of it. He's got big old Saul's armor and got big old boots on. And David, look at how it reads. I love this. He clothed him with his garments and put a bronze helmet on his head, and clothed him with his armor and girded his sword over his armor. And David tried to walk, for he had not tested them. So David said, I cannot go with these. May I add that you cannot fight in someone else's armor. You got armored men and women sitting on this platform whose lives we all respect. They don't walk on water, but I'll tell you what, they're about the best around. But it's easy to think that something about them will somehow become yours by osmosis. It doesn't work like that. Someday you're going to be on your own. You won't hear their voices anymore. And you're going to be out there in your own valley. And you'll realize, I can't fight in their armor. And even though I respect them, their stuff doesn't fit me. David said, I've got to go with what the Lord has equipped me with. He said, I've not tested them. And so David took them off. He laid it all in a pile. And look, this is so good. He took a stick in his hand. Isn't that great? As a giant takes a stick in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag which he had, even in his pouch. So he takes this pouch he's got hanging from his waist, and he puts these stones in his pouch. And we read, and he approached the Philistine. The Philistine came and approached David with the shield bearer in front of him, and he disdained him. He was but a youth. And Philistine, verse 43 says, am I a dog? What is this? As a matter of fact, you are. Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. How dare he do that to God's anointed? It all flies by David. It doesn't in any way hit him. David stands there with the stones rattling in the bag on his hip and a stick in his hand. And David says to him, you come to me with a sword and a spear and a javelin. I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. Champions never heard words like that. By the way, you got to stand up the face of a giant, especially if the giant's name is legalism. You'll fight it throughout your ministry. I've learned that if I don't deal with legalists straight on, face to face, with strong words, they don't hear you. And they do their best to tear your church apart or to put people under their control. And David says to him, this day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and remove your head from you. Isn't that a great line? I'm going to knock you down. I'm going to remove your head from your bod, okay? Just want to set it straight before I do it. Verse 49, David put his hand into the bag, took from it a stone. Can't you hear? Hit him right between the running lights. I mean, he fell like a sack of salt. Just like that. Gone. Now you're talking. That's really all it takes. In fact, the simple statement is verse 50. David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone and struck the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in David's hand. He didn't fight with swords. He had learned to fight with stones and a staff. That's what worked for him. And he had cultivated it. And the men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines as far as the valley and to the gates of Ekron. And we go back to David. David, verse 54, I like this part, took the Philistine head and brought it to Jerusalem. So David stands over the champion, cuts that old head off, holds it up like that. It'd make every Marine salivate. There it is. Look at that. That's what he really is. He's nothing. He's nothing in comparison to the Lord our God. And he brought the head to Jerusalem. And notice in verse 54, he put the weapons in his tent, David's tent. Don't go too quickly over this wrap-up of the battle. That's significant. What else is in David's tent? How about the paw of a bear? How about the mane of a lion or the tail? Just a reminder of those lion and bear moments when God wrought a victory through him. He put the weapons in his tent. My time is up, but I brought along a bag of stones, which came from the valley of Elah. That's right. When I first used this little bag of stones, I was here at chapel, and Dr. Pentecost was sitting over here looking at me over the top of his glasses. He's been to Israel as much as Jesus, and so he's he listens to me as I say, I'm down there fingering these stones, and I'm thinking, boy, maybe David looked past some of these and chose the ones he chose. How great is that? Dr. Pentecost said to me later, hey, Chuck, says, you need to know that about every month, Tel Aviv sends a dump truck down to the valley and for the sake of the tourists, drops all those stones in there. Leave it to Pentecost to mess up a great illustration, huh? So I now tell people these are not David's stones, but these are stones that at least were right where he got his. Let me give you 5 things to remember about giants. Here we go. Number 1. All giants seem larger than they really are. All giants seem larger than they really are. You think you'll not be able to get control over whatever that giant is, one I named or maybe one I didn't name. It seems larger than it really is. It's not larger than our God. It's not larger than your Savior. Here's the second. Success in facing giants depends on how well you prepare for them. By the way, you do that in private. We're not little icons sitting on public shelves, we ministers. We do our best work while no one is looking, or we should. That's where you prepare your heart. That's where you pour out your soul. That's where you cry out for God's help and remind yourself that the battle is His. It's in private. So success in facing your giant depends on how well you prepare for that giant. 3, never forget your own lion and bear stories. Every one of you has some. I have some. They have been entered into my journal, so I'll never forget them. That's why I say to you, don't ever forget what God has done for you. It's a little cliche, count your many blessings. You can put it that way, but think of them as God's powerful working in and through your life. Never forget your own lion and bear stories. Remember that magnificent, impossible situation that God turned around for you. Remember that prayer that you offered in a weak faith, and by the grace of God, He answered. Most of you never dreamed of sitting in this place 2-3 years ago, and here you sit. There's some lion and bear stories that have gone into that. Number 4, when the crucial moment arrives, remember these 5 words. The battle is what? The Lord's. The battle is the Lord's. The day you take on a giant in your own flesh is a day you will face defeat. All the way through this episode, this brief battle, David's focus is on the Lord his God. No wonder he's called a man after God's own heart. Everybody else focused on the giant. David realized that his God was greater than any giant. So when the crucial moment arrives, remember those 5 words. Learn to say them to yourself. I don't know how many times I've said the words to my own self or to Cynthia as we're driving somewhere, going through a tough time. Let's remember, honey, the battle is the Lord's. Let's remember, this isn't our battle. This is the Lord's battle. He's the warrior. He's the triumphant one. He's the majestic one. We're nothing without him. Number 5. Following every giant victory, place a reminder in your mental trophy case. Following every giant victory, place a reminder in your mental trophy case. I hope you journal. I hope you have a place where you record. You literally write down the way God handled whatever and slew your giant. Years ago, all of us remember the very effective life of Corrie ten Boom. Remember? Remember her words when she would describe what she was going through with Betsy before Betsy's death? And then finally standing there in that death camp, not knowing what tomorrow was going to bring, she came to realize there is no pit so deep, but that he is not deeper still. May I play on that for what I'm trying to say today? There is no giant so great that he is not greater still. Please bow with me. Whether faculty member or student or guest, we all have them. Secret giants that haunt us and could defeat us unless we remember greater is he who is in you than he who is in the world. Father, you are the powerful one. We are the weak ones. You are the potter. We are the clay. You are the master. We are the slave. The bond slave of your Son, Jesus. You know the end from the beginning. We don't even know what the next hour will include. You are infinitely majestic. And we are finite, mere human beings, filled with the flesh, forever focusing on what is seen rather than the unseen. Begin to deliver us from that habit, I pray, and build within us a strong determination to take on whatever may be a giant in the power of your Spirit and in the majestic name of Christ. We pray. Everyone said. Be delighted to tell you that we will pick up your full tuition if you choose. Now, I'd be delighted. We're not going to do that, but I'd be delighted to do that. And since we can't, you might see this student that won all that money back there and see if he'd help you make it happen. It's always fun to be back and to see fresh faces and other faces who are a part of the chapel service. This is a place full of memories for those of us who spent years here, and it will be for you, if the Lord leads you here, some of the best memories you'll have for the rest of your days. In every calling and in every career, there are certain, shall we say, occupational hazards. And the ministry is no exception. In ministry, perhaps with that in mind, we might call them besetting sins. By that I mean those areas that we're prone to fall into more easily. Those temptations we tend to yield to a little more often. than we even want to admit. Two come to mind, and they are perhaps the most familiar to us in the ranks of ministry. We wrestle with them, and you, as you are involved in a life of ministry, will as well. The first one is the more popular or the more commonly found of the two, and it would be hypocrisy. Hypocrisy has to do with trying to be someone we're not, leaving an impression that we are someone other than who we really are. It runs a close second with duplicity, appearing one thing to one person and another thing to someone else. It is clearly a lack of authenticity. Hypocrites are not authentic. That is, when we fall into hypocrisy, we are inauthentic in our lives, in our words, in our responses, our actions. People who are hypocrites busy themselves posing. Now, the second and the more subtle of the two is envy. Envy has to do with wishing we were in someone else's skin, or somehow in either subtle or not so subtle ways, putting other people down who are truly demonstrating strengths we may not have, wish we did, or virtues that they have cultivated better than we, and therefore we fall into the very common habit of comparing. Hypocrites pose. Those who fall into envy compare. In a unique way, the Lord Jesus gives a test to His most strong-willed disciple. And it happens in a section of Scripture that the hurried reader would probably pass by, rushing from the resurrection onto the scene of ascension, out of John and into the book of Acts. But I'd like us to stop there by this ancient body of water that is 13 miles long, 7.5 miles wide, and about 32 miles around, along the familiar shoreline where some of these same disciples had their beginning with Jesus. It is here in John 21 we find Jesus making His third appearance to these men whom He loves and has loved them to the end. And He's looking into the eyes of 7 of the 11 faithful who have proven themselves not so faithful in the recent hours. Stop and remember. When you get to John 21, Jesus has been raised, but they have not yet caught up in their emotions. They're still confused. They spent 3.5 years having left the nets or left their business or left the familiar world of their young adulthood and throwing themselves into this new calling. They have followed Jesus and watched Him teach and watched Him heal and do remarkable miracles and, in fact, be criticized and finally arrested in the garden when they all forsook Him and fled and nailed to a cross and left to die. So these men come, even though they've already seen Him a couple of times, they come with sort of a low-grade depression, if I read the scene correctly. They're disillusioned. They are unemployed. They are displaced. Their master has told them he's not only going to die, but he's going to leave them. And it is almost as if their dreams have gone up in a whoosh. And their hopes have been dashed. So, not surprisingly, these 7 who are named for us in verse 2, 2 are not, but the others are, There is Peter, and there is Thomas, and there is Nathaniel, and there are James and John, and two not named. But the 7 have come, and Peter says, almost with a shrug of the shoulders, I'm going fishing. We may have to fall back on what we're familiar with, and so he shakes the dust from the nets, and he pulls up the old boat of days past, no doubt, in his life, that familiar body of water where he made a pretty good living. And the other 6 say, we're going with you. So they push out to sea. It's toward evening, and they fish all night. As a matter of fact, they not only fish all night with the casting of nets, they catch nothing. According to the end of verse 3, there's nothing to show for their effort. And the sun begins to peak over the horizon as they sigh, and exhausted, some of them have by now, no doubt, sat back down and thought, hey, we can't even catch fish like we used to. I have never fished all night. I have certainly fished and caught nothing. But I have never cast nets through the night. I've only cast nets to get the bait, but I've never fished with nets, and it must be an exhausting thing. And I'll tell you this, when you catch nothing and you have fished for a long, long time, the last thing you want somebody to say is, you haven't caught anything, have you? And that's exactly what they hear from the shoreline about 100 yards away. It's a shadowy figure. He says, hey, fellows, you haven't caught anything, have you? Their answer reveals a little impatience and maybe some impudence. No! You can just kind of hear it ringing across the water, as maybe in one voice they answer back. And then this stranger says to them, cast your nets on the other side, on the right side of the boat. Surprisingly, they don't argue. They, by now, are desperate enough to try anything, and casting their nets on the other side, it is remarkable. Later in the passage, verse 11, when they've taken the time to number the fish, there's 153 of them, and they're called large fish. Let's say they were 3.5, 4 pounds. That's over a quarter of a ton of fish. There's a lot of fish. So many fish they can't even draw the net into the boat. John leans over to Peter and says, "St, it's the Lord." I love Peter's response. He shoves both arms into his outer tunic and plunges right into the water and swims up to the shoreline. He probably is thinking we have a little unfinished business to take care of. Or maybe more likely, I would love to be near him again. Anything is better than this. Nothing is better than that. And so he comes to the shoreline, dripping wet. The other 6, not able to pull the net into the boat, drag it along with the boat and get to the shoreline. And when they arrive, there's already a charcoal fire and fish. Where did he get the fish? Hey, he made fish, so that's not a big thing. And there's bread, warm, broiled fish for breakfast, and he invites them to come and let's eat together. It's a great scene. If you like the out of doors, there are a few places better than along a lake early in the morning with a broiled meal all ready to enjoy. They sit around and casually visit with each other, maybe reminiscing, sighing, questioning, talking openly and freely. And then Jesus begins a verbal test. The first test is on hypocrisy. The second test will be about envy. Peter passes with flying colors the first test. He didn't a few hours earlier back when he said, though all these others may fail and fall, I will be true to the end. You don't find this in Peter today. Not this morning. Not after the denials. There's no hypocrisy here. Jesus rivets his eyes on Peter and begins the dialogue. Verse 15. Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Look at the question. Let your eyes study it. Don't drift. Imagine yourself in a classroom with 6 other students. You're sitting there having been a pretty miserable example of scholarship over the last number of days. And the teacher calls you by name, looks at you, and addresses an area of concern, and even does so comparatively more than these. There's some argument over what that refers to. I think it makes best sense to say more than these other of your contemporaries. Do you love me more than these? Peter, I'm sure by this moment, is blushing a little, but we admire him for his honesty. Yes, Lord, I love you. In the Greek text, there are 2 words that are used interchangeably, and sometime out of a desire for difference. And here in John's Gospel, there is first the question Jesus asked, and his word is rendered by John, agapao. We get our familiar word, agape, that we toss around, love. This is a verb, and it has reference to a divine level of love. It's a John 3:16 love. It's a love of the mind. It's a love of the will. It's a love of deep devotion without concern for the response of the other. It's a love that is focused with full attention on the good of the other. Do you love me? Love me like that more than these? Peter's answer is rendered in another term, phileo. It's a word for fondness and affection. Both mean affection, but there's a level to agapao that phileo does not reach most often. And Peter answers, I'm fond of you. Now, admittedly, they're conversing in Aramaic. We have Mel Gibson to thank for that reminder. They've been talking in Aramaic. That's the vernacular, so Aramaic would not be that specific. Perhaps the same word is used if this dialogue takes place in Aramaic. But John, who is the writer, hears the inflection in Jesus' voice and watches the body language and sees the eye contact. And when John has a choice under the Spirit's inspiration to record the dialogue, he specifically uses the verb for that kind of love when Jesus asks it, and this kind of love when Peter answers. I'm fond of you, Lord. Jesus very graciously, without one word of shame, with no rebuke, says to Peter, look at the response. Tend my lambs. What a great relief that must have been for a man who had failed, and failed so miserably and so publicly, and failed on the heels of his own proud overstatement and inflated pride of recent hours. Tend my lambs. Peter probably thinks by now the test is over. Whew. Jesus says the second time to him, do you love me? He takes away the comparative part of the question as he looks deeply into Peter's eyes, and he says to him, think again. Go deeper. Is there a love for me that is at this level? Forget the others. There's no more of these in this second question. Do you love me? Peter Now, blushing again, responds, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Phileo. The same interchange, same verbs rendered by John. Peter comes back with, the best I can say is, I'm fond of you. I'm drawn to you. I swam quickly toward you. We have a closeness. But if I may add this, I can't commit to a level that I know I haven't reached. That's authenticity. And of all things, he asked him the third time, Simon, son of John, are you just fond of me? He uses Peter's word, or at least John renders it that way. And somehow, in the Aramaic, as they spoke it, it was clear to Peter that Jesus had lowered the level when he said, are you just fond of me? I love Peter's response. He begins with a little theology. Lord, you know all things. You are omniscient. You know me from beginning to end. You know my waking up and my lying down moments. You know when I misspeak. You know when I have failed. You know my past. You know all about the last 3.5 years. How many times I spoke too quickly and acted too rashly. You know all things. Then he adds, you know that I'm fond of you. 2 words for know. One is a word of academic or intellectual knowledge. That's the first one, oida. The second is gnosko, to know by experience. You know from experience, Lord. As John renders it, that's the best I can say. And Jesus very graciously responds, tend my sheep. Isn't it wonderful that Jesus doesn't look at Peter and say, well, after all these years and all the things I've taught you, can't you at least come up to the level I'm expecting? There's none of that. We're the ones who do that. We're the ones who shame people. We're the ones who lifted that bar just above what anybody, including ourselves, can reach. Not Jesus. He saved his face, and he gave him a 10 plus for authenticity. Good for you, Peter. A number of years ago, I was invited to speak at a school in Florida. It was at that time sort of at its height in student body size. It had been founded by a sort of self-taught man with gifts of evangelism and discipleship, and the school was just running on all cylinders. And I had the joy of going when the school was at its height. About 2,200 students, which is large for a Bible college. Certainly one in that area. And it was, however, on the heels of a failure where the president and founder had run away with one of the students, left his marriage, left his family, and left the school to pick up the pieces. Faculty is fractured, and there's a break in trust, and by now the integrity is on the block. I met the man who was doing his best to take the former president's place, happened to be the president's son. And he met me at the airport. Never forget it, when I got off the plane, I called his name and I said, "Hi, I'm Chuck." He said, "Hi." Called his name. I said, "How you doing?" "Fantastic." I remembered reading a letter that had talked about what had happened at the school, and seemed a little unusual that he would respond. I still hear his voice bouncing around the echo of the airport there in Fort Lauderdale. And amazingly, they invited me back. The next time I went back was was a year later. The student body was about 500, maybe 450. Way less than half the size of before. And I stepped off the plane, called his name. I remembered him. And How you doing? Fantastic. We're going to turn this thing around. This is going to be great. And that particular visit, I met with the faculty, and by then they were half the size, and some of them were considering leaving, and the morale was at an all-time low. I went back a third time, and the student body was not quite 200, and the school was clearly on its way down and out. And I met him at the airport, and I said, how you doing? I'll never forget his response. He said, come here. So I walked over to him, and he wrapped his big arms around me, and he whispered, I'm growing and I'm learning, but I'm not fantastic. I could have just kissed him for saying that. I didn't, but I said to him, I said, good for you. Now you're talking. 10 plus for authenticity. You rarely are doing fantastic. So get rid of that word. That's a silly word. You're often growing and learning. Practice that. Jesus, I'm growing and I'm learning, but I'm not fantastic. I'm fond of you. I think in it is, I'd love to cultivate what we once had, now that I've been where I've been. And I know our time is short, but I hope you read that in my answer. Jesus says, tend my lambs. So by now, Peter must be encouraged. So to cut to the chase, Jesus then looks at him and says, into verse 19, follow me. Remember, there are two tests here. The first one, high marks, it's done very well. Now the second, follow me. One simple Greek word. Interesting, it is a second person singular present imperative. Singular meaning, I'm not saying this to the 6 of you, I'm saying to the 7 of you, I'm saying this just to you, Peter. You, me. Keep on coming after. You keep on following me. You, Peter. I take it by now that Jesus has stood up and started to walk away down that shore. And I also take it that Peter, by now, has begun to do the same. Not only Peter, but Jesus' very close disciple, John. In fact, Peter looks over his shoulder and he sees the one whom Jesus loves. And he sees him following. And so Peter, looking around, says, Lord, what about John? I mean, you're asking me to do that. I mean, fail the test. Jesus' response is magnificent. It's always magnificent. Jesus said in verse 22, if I want him to remain until I come, what is that to you? You, me, keep on following. Same verb, same word, same tense, same mode. You, singular, me, keep on following. I left out a very important part before he says that command the second time. Verse 22, if I want him to remain until I come, what is that to you? Which we would say today, paraphrased, it's none of your business. You, me, keep on following. You see what Peter did? He compared himself with another. You're asking a strong and hard and demanding thing of me. What are you asking of her, of him, of them? You're not careful, you'll do that throughout your ministry. You're putting me through all of this. You're expecting this from me. Look at how easy he's got it. I mean, I studied just as hard in school. I worked just as hard. Sometime you'll have to admit, harder than so-and-so who, after graduation, enters a ministry that becomes well-known and, of all things, very popular across the country. And here you're slugging it away, doing your best, following him. In unguarded moments, if you are not careful, you will be submerged in envy. So I find in these few verses 2 or 3, I think, timeless principles. And let's close with them. The first takes us back to the fishing all night, and then the net's going on the other side of the boat, and they're catching a huge amount because they were willing to take his orders. So let me give you the first one. When the Lord offers an opportunity to change futility into fruitfulness, be open to change. When the Lord offers opportunity to change futility into fruitfulness, be open to change. We got to hand it to the disciples, some of whom were experienced fishermen. When that stranger says, cast nets on the other side, they cast them on the other side. And their whole night of futility was changed to a quarter of a ton of fish. They were willing to do it. Some of you are on the edge of attending school at this place, and you're weighing all the options. Don't weigh them too long. Don't hesitate too long. Plunge right in. When you sense it's his plan, plunge in. Go after it. Like Peter plunging into the water. When he realized it was the Lord who was giving those instructions. If it's the Lord leading you to say yes, don't even think maybe. Certainly don't think no. Be open. Fruitfulness invariably accompanies the Father's will. Fruitfulness like you've never known. Second command, or second principle. When his plan is to move you into a new and challenging direction, expect a period of soul searching. With Peter, it was 3 questions asked in front of his peers. With you, it may be long nights and some sleepless ones as you are wrestling with direction. May not be as clear as the one sitting next to you. You'll go through some soul searching, just like Peter. Stay real. Think it through. That's all part of the process. And then respond. Third, when he makes it clear that you're to follow him into a new direction, focus fully on him and no one else. Guard your heart against comparing. It'll lead you into all kinds of confusion. There are some of you here who are not just now beginning to think about coming to the school. You're here. Some of you are near your day of graduation, and the Lord opens the door for you in one area, and he opens the door for another and yet another. And in years to come, you will realize that the door opened for you is a door that included many tests that one of your own close classmates has never had to go through. It's none of your business. It's none of your business. Remember, it's a second person singular. He calls us one at a time, focusing on us. In ministry, there are two very real occupational hazards. In the process of your working, your growing and learning experiences of preparation, you will come up against them over and over. I urge you to be one of great authenticity, at the same time, one who refuses to compare. It's like the old country preacher says, be who you is. If you ain't who you is who you ain't. I would have never dreamed my life would have turned as it has. I live my life more surprised than anybody I've ever met. I am constantly amazed at the direction God has led me, taken me. Sitting where you're now sitting, I would have never in my wildest imaginations thought it would have included what it has. My worst days in the process occurred when I yielded to hypocrisy and envy. Don't go there. Search us, O God, and know our hearts. Try us and know our thoughts. See if there be any way of pain within us, and lead us in the way everlasting. We're yours, Lord, and thankfully that fight is over. Now that we're with you and in you, and now that we find ourselves enveloped in your magnificent care and grace, use this passage, use this story, use this message to clear away the fog and the trash of all the things that would interrupt clear and unmistakable leading and absolute unwavering obedience. In the name of Jesus. All of us pray. And everybody said, amen.